You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Great to be back today, and today we're going to be talking about a lot of neat things today, so we'll see how this all takes place, but we're going to be talking about doubt and how to understand doubt, how to deal with doubt in our day-to-day lives, and how doubt has become a big aspect of most of our lives. Many of us are dealing with it, and many of us get, basically, we almost get off target trying to figure out what we need to be doing and who we are based on this doubt. And for many of us, it's been a lifelong situation. It's been a lifelong situation where we deal with it, we're constantly bombarded by it, and it seems that we are unable to actually be at our top, at where we need to be, at that level of, wisdom, enlightenment, security. And I think that many of us deal with this on a daily basis. And so I found someone that has written 2 books recently. The first book is My Friendship with Doubt, and the second book is Rulers Don't Measure. And she's an inspirational author of children's books. She's also a mom, a wife, a banker. I mean, the list goes on. But the interesting part about it is that she speaks from truth. She speaks from truth to understand what is actually happening and what has happened in her life, how she began to overcome the concept of doubt, and how to see it for what it is. So right now I'd like to talk to and introduce here on Live Your True Life Perspective, Diane Scabilloni. Diane, great to have you here live on the show. How are you doing today?
I am great, Ashley. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm so glad you could come on the show today because I think that it is really time. I think many of us are dealing with situations and circumstances now. I think many of us are dealing with situations from the time that we were in the family, at home. And it's interesting how, as we grow up, and when we begin our life, right, we begin that life and we're like this perfect baby, and then all of a sudden all this stuff gets thrown at us. And this stuff just kind of, it's almost like it hides who we are. And when I started reading My Friendship with Doubt, and I think this book, it might be considered a children's book, but I mean, honestly, don't you think that this is really a great book for adults to read as well?
I think so, yes. I've been getting feedback from both children and adults for sure. Everybody can relate. Yep.
So tell me, what was your inspiration for writing My Friendship with Doubt?
Yeah. Gosh, it was, I think it's just going to sound sort of funny, but it's almost like my memoirs. I have been on a spiritual journey for many, many years, and probably like a lot of your listeners, grew up in not the greatest of environments. It was a very dysfunctional family, alcoholism, physical, emotional, sexual, all kinds of abuses. So coming out of that, I really did not know what was normal. And so I would latch on to lots of different people throughout my lifetime. And God had blessed me with like different counselors at the right time, like, teachers and mentors and business coaches. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I was working with my business coach. And I was so excited to tell her on our call that I don't need doubt in my life anymore. And like, I couldn't believe, Ashley, that sentence came out of my mouth because that was like my middle name. And that was just so empowering. And so one of the things that she said to me, she knew that I was a longtime journaler, always writing. And I had always had like in the back of my mind that I felt like a bucket list thing for me was to be an author. And so she said, you should write a book about it. And then it was one of those, like the skies opened and the sun shined on me. It was like, oh, this is my jam. Like, yes, I am going to do this. And I had no idea what it would be, but I just sat down with my journal. Like, I think even like that day I hung up with her And I grabbed a scratch pad and I just like started writing all these notes. And I swear it just flowed. This was like something that just came like out of me. And as I was writing and things were coming to me, it was really like a self understanding and a like a self healing. It was just a very powerful experience. So yeah, and I was like, oh, it's a children's book. Like it was like, okay, good. Because when she said write a book about that, I didn't know what that meant. Like I knew it felt right, but I'm like, but it was totally a children's book. But at the same time, it fits for adults too. Like, just like you said, but I feel like we heal from going back to having that child mindset where, kids, they release, like they don't have to release anything actually, just like you said at the beginning, like they're little babies and they're all like free and fresh and giggly and all that stuff. Like the world brings on all these doubts on top of us and teach us like that's how we need to function. And then like I feel like then the next journey is to, like take off all of this stuff to get down to our true self. So
that's so true, Diane. And it's interesting. It's, in the work that I do, with clients, it's always interesting, that doubt piece, that questionable. And it goes back to is there something wrong with me? And you and I talked about this on the phone the other day, and it was so interesting. Both you and I have struggled with that, and I think most of the listeners here on Live Your True Life Perspectives to some degree has struggled with asking themselves, there must be something wrong with me. If somebody doesn't like me, it must be my problem. If I didn't get this, there was something wrong with me. I did that, or I didn't do the right thing, or something happened. And it's very interesting how a lot of us, majority of us, our go-to is, oh, I did something wrong. There's something wrong with me inherently. What do I change to be liked, or what do I change to fit in?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of like, if we all came from dysfunctional families, that was, it's kind of like for me, when I think back about it, my mom kept us in this very abusive life because she was fearful. So she just, like, when you think about it, you probably know like when it is, I think it's like 7 years old. Until you're 7, you are literally a sponge. Mm-hmm. You just take on every single thing. And so, so if someone says your life is to be fearful and shameful and not take risks and keep your mouth shut, and what you have to say isn't important, then okay, that's the sponge, suck that in. And that's who I am. And it's just not truth. It just is not truth. But we think it is.
It feels like it is, and it's interesting how like one negative thing, you hear one negative thing and that negative thing can live with you for a long time. It can change your world. It can make you adapt thought processes. And, it's interesting how we have to hear something positive over and over again to really register with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's so true. I mean, just, I've had so many situations where I'll have like this amazing experience, and then maybe like one person out of like 10 people in the room seemed like they looked at me funny. Well, really, they might have just like had like a stomach ache or something, but I like focus on that person instead of instead of everything else. And so I think it's a matter of like, we are retraining. We just have to decide, like I've just, through this whole experiencing of writing and self-discovery, I'm saying, you know what, doggone it, I am rooting and grounding myself in love. Because you think about it, like there's only two places to be. There's like a spectrum. It's either love or there's fear. And I have lived, 30 plus blah, 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 or more years, the majority of time in that fear space. And I know what that looks like. And I'm tired of it. It's just not good. And so, choosing every day to be in fear, choosing every day to be in love and not fear. Now, is it easy? No. Can you be kicked off? I mean, for me, I could like have the most beautiful meditation in the morning and everything is fabulous. And, then my husband comes downstairs and says something to me and I'm like, bam, it goes away. But it's like, okay, no, I'm going to not let that take me down that negative road. I'm going to turn back. God gave me this image of like a typewriter. You remember the old fashioned typewriters?
I do.
Where like the return button, that return bar. And that's what I see in my head. It's like, no, return. And it like, and I did a program, like a speaking thing. And I gave everybody a little card that had the picture of the typewriter. On the other side, it said, return to me. And it's really like to return to, you could think of that as return to God, or even just return to who the me really is, like before all the yuck got piled in.
I totally agree with you, and it's interesting in this book too. And the illustrations are great, and there's multiple situations I want to bring up. When I thought I had strength in my strength gown, doubt would say, "I don't think so." She guarded me. She would say, "No way, run! You're not that strong. Other people are stronger than you. You can't handle this. You're weak." And I think this is really powerful because I know that one thing that a lot of people don't want to do is they don't want to deal with confrontation, even though in order to apply boundaries or in order to be at peace and do what's right by somebody, sometimes we have to allow for conflict. And we have to be okay with expressing ourselves. And you're right. It's like when doubt comes in, it's scary because, oh, no, I'm too weak to stand up for myself. Or I'm too weak for that. Or they're not going to listen to me. And so then we undermine ourselves.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I feel like the doubt is really, from when I think back to like my childhood as I was like unfolding all of this, for me to show up as a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 12-year-old. And like, I really, in my spirit, I was a little sassy pants in my heart, like what I felt while negative, horrible things were happening. Like I knew I could not say these things like, dear stepfather, you are a complete blah, 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 blah. And this is wrong. Like I knew I couldn't say it. So doubt was truly a protector. I feel like doubt was my survival. I had to stifle. I couldn't, like in my book, it talks about like having strength and having joy and having peace. In those environments, you are not allowed to have that. They are not a part of your life. So doubt was protection. And so then we grow up and then we think we go back to the same rule book that we had that was like in kindergarten, like this is how you live. And then like, no, we don't have, how many, like I've been away from my stepfather. He's since deceased. And I still pull out his rule book sometimes. I'm like, what the heck am I doing?
Well, when we return, we'll be talking more about that. We're going to be talking more about doubt when we return. So stay with us, guys, because Diane's got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to be talking about doubt, how we can not have to worry about measuring up anymore, and how to really be able to live our true life. Okay, that's what this is all about. So stay tuned. We got a great show for you left. Dan Nelson's going to show up here later on in the hour. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. Will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking with Diane Scabilloni, and amazing work here. And, Diane, right before the break, we were talking about doubt. And it was interesting how you said, in the very beginning, when you were a child and safeguarding yourself, with people that you couldn't stand up against, doubt was not a bad thing. Doubt was kind of a safety net to keep you as safe as possible. But then as we get older, doubt is something that we have to let go of. And I thought that was really profound.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, it's just a spiritual download that I got. And as you see in the book, it has, doubt is a cloud. And it's just like doubt being a cloud is almost like when you think about your thoughts, because your thoughts will create the doubt. And it's just allowing them. I've been learning to just like let them pass and not like give them so much control, because our mind and our brain just wants to keep us safe. And so it just gives us all this chatter, and it's always like on alert. And I feel like people that have had, difficult childhoods or, PSTD or anything like that, they're on high alert all the time. And so I think we just need to recognize that. Like for me, I had to recognize that and be gentle with that part of me and be like, okay, I see that you're a little bit nervous, but maybe let's think about it in a different way. And let's let trust come in a little bit. Let's not feel so tense all the time. It's been a process for sure.
And I love the part there's also in the book, when I would wear my peace gown, doubt would step in front of me and tell me not to let down my guard. She'd tell me dangers around every corner. Peace is the calm before the storm. And so I know that many of us are constantly waiting for the other shoe to fall. And it seems like, oh my gosh, I'm happy, or something's working for me in my life, or, for the first time I have this or that. And I know many of you, maybe for the first time your career is working, or for the first time, you're in a happy family environment, or things seem to be working, but you're like, God, every time this happens in my life, or every time I've had successes, bad things have happened right after. And I know that many people are on alert, and I know there's so many things going on in our world today, and we're just dealing with so many things happening right now, and it's overwhelming, and it's hard to be at peace, and it's hard to, accept the goodness that's coming into our life and the fear of what could happen on the back end.
Right. No, it's true. And it becomes a practice of, I think we have to feel that. It's totally normal to have fear and to have panic. And the best thing we can do is to acknowledge that and sit with it and cry with it and, allow it to express itself. And then once we've purged it, to say, okay, well, maybe let's find some things that are good. Because when you look around, the trees are not panicking. Little squirrels are doing their thing, getting ready for winter here in Pennsylvania. It's, like there is peace and there is good. And I think it's just a matter of trying to look for it. And, and you can find it if you look for it.
You're right, and it depends on what we're looking for. It's interesting. And, when we were trying to be talking more about rulers don't measure either, but, when you're looking at this concept, and I know it's hard sometimes when there's a lot of stress and anxiety around us, that we have to really figure out, okay, what am I going to focus on? What do I need to focus on? And I love what Diane just said is that, I literally will refocus my mind, refocus myself in the morning to focus on what works. And when I get up and I can focus on the loving experience that I see in life, and I'll see the man at the road, hugging his dog, or I'll see the little child, running after something, or I can see the opposite. So let's see what we can choose to see. In the meantime, stay tuned. We got a great show still left. Dan Nelson's going to be joining us as well. Don't forget, and Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Glad to be back today here on the show, and it's a great show today, and if you're just tuning in or you've been tuned in, you know that I've been talking with Diane, and Diane's written these great books. We were talking about my friendship with doubt, and now I'd like to kind of move to the second book that she's written, Rulers Don't Measure, and it's a great book for, obviously, great for kids, because these are the things that we need our kids to learn. These are the things that maybe some of us didn't learn. Maybe these were the things that we are still challenged with. This is definitely books for adults and children, but for a child to be able to read these things and be able to connect with this is powerful. Diane, I was looking at and reading Rulers Don't Measure, and another amazing book that you've written. And I love the fact that it's like, in the beginning, it talks about how, we were given all these tools in the very beginning, and then, life changed because we tried to be like other people, or we were told we weren't good enough, or there was something wrong. And then us kind of becoming that chameleon, trying to follow other people and do what they do, thinking that's the best, mode of operandi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is what I feel like from my experience, I definitely did, because coming from, a dysfunctional background, I knew, even when I was a child, my mom would tell me, this is not normal. And I would be like, okay, then why are we here? But, so knowing that lifestyle of, fighting and anger and aggression and all that wasn't normal, I didn't know what was normal. So I would watch other people and I would observe and I would compare myself, and I would, like you said, literally be a chameleon. Like, okay, these people act like this in this situation, so then that's how you're supposed to do it. So you're not really showing up as your true self. You're showing up as you think people expect you to show up. And, a lot of times that just doesn't lead to, like you're saying, like a true life then. You're just behaving the way you think people want you to behave.
And you find yourself, the growing up process is so hard, and you find yourself in groups of people, they're just kind of lost, and you kind of become lost too, trying to find yourself, and people make some poor choices, based on trying to get in where you try to fit in. And I found that that's something that a lot of people fall prey into, is that, I want to find someone that, I can talk to. And so you kind of get in with who will kind of accept you in the group, no matter what the group is doing sometimes. And, I feel like kids, this is some really valuable information for children, but I think it really connects with adults who have been through this process and know, how they've picked up the pieces and moved on with their lives.
Right. And I think it's a matter of just, what I've had in those experiences with like family or, family and friends. And after I'm at an event, say, and I leave there, I ask myself, how do you feel now? And if I feel heavy, if I feel exhausted, if I feel less than, I'm like, okay, what is happening there? Are these your people? Maybe you need to hang out with different people, or maybe you're judging yourself in a way that isn't truth. Like, what is your self-talk that is happening at this time? Are you comparing yourself, because maybe this person has like all these things that you want and you think that you're not good enough. There's so much self-talk that we do that just is not good for ourselves.
Definitely the negative self-talk and the comparison, and comparing is so mainstream now, especially obviously face-to-face, but obviously on social media, constantly comparing your lives to other people, seeing what they have versus what we have. And you're right, when you're in a group or you're feeling that uncomfortability, is it toxicity or is it us judging ourselves and feeling like we're lesser than in the group and not realizing it's really coming from our internal thought process, not from an outside source?
Right. And I think that's where we just need to get quiet with ourselves and just, sometimes we have to cut ties, certain relationships. If we identify that, maybe it's not so much the self-talk, but it's the relationship, sometimes we need to just change those. And, choose to be with people that are more uplifting, that are uplifting to us. And, and then to really open up, like explore what we're saying to ourselves.
And you're right. There's some times where you do have to cut ties. There are some times, and I think it's when you've tried everything and you've really gotten quiet with yourself and you've gotten mindful and realizing that this is not your internal judgment, but there's some sort of outside judgment. I would assume that's kind of what you're saying, is that's the time when you kind of say, okay, I might need to make some distance here and really go within and see why I was wanting to hang out with that in the first place.
Well, yeah, because I know for me that a lot of times that was more comfortable. I mean, I've known my husband since I was 16, but I thought he was so stinking nice to me that I broke up with him like a bunch of different times because he was too nice. And a man is supposed to be mean and gruff and abusive. So it just didn't make any sense. So, yeah, it's like you said, getting quiet and saying, okay, what is this really about?
That's powerful, and I know many people can connect with that here on the show. We're going to have some golden words of wisdom from Diane in a little while, because I know many of you can connect with exactly what she's saying. Now it's time for our history lesson today on Live Your True Life Perspectives. Now it's time for our resident genealogist, Dan Nelson, and Dan's always got these amazing historical real life stories that actually really did take place. It's always great to be able to connect with our past to understand where we're heading. Dan, great to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
Doing great.
What do you have for us today? What kind of historical, because we've been talking about in the last few weeks have been very interesting, the kidnapping and all that kind of stuff. What do we have today?
Well, we'll go back a little further in time. This is actually a story about the kidnap victims' mother's great-great-grandfather. So it ties into the same line. But started out here with a little clip from a newspaper back then. This was in 1870, December 23rd, so 2 days before Christmas. It says, Dr. Alban shot. And he says he formerly resided in Nevada City, and he was shot at Ukiah City last week by a gambler named Pacheco. And it appears that the gambler was paying attention to Dr. Alban's daughter. And the doctor objected to Pacheco on the grounds that he was a professional gambler. So the couple determined that they were going to elope, and they got a license and started away in a buggy for a parson, or somebody who could marry them. And Dr. Alban, he came up on horseback, caught up with them a few miles from Ukiah City. Pistols were brought into use, and the doctor was shot in the mouth, but he was not dangerously hurt. The lover was slightly injured while the girl escaped unhurt. After this episode, everybody returned to Ukiah City, and the girl still insisted on marrying Pacheco. So that's how his day went with his daughter. But yeah, so this guy, his name was William Green Alban. And he grew up with John Sherman, which you probably might not recognize that name, but he was a very powerful U.S. senator from Ohio. We've been hearing a lot lately about senators, right?
We have.
But, yeah, and he was the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, so the guy that did Sherman's march through Atlanta and so forth during the Civil War. These guys were members of the Odd Fellows, which was a thing to do back then, a guy's club or whatever. And so he married a gal, and that gal's father, named Abraham, was a physician, and he taught William how to be a physician. Unfortunately, she died in not too long after they're married, and it was really weird. She died of marasmus, which I'd never heard of marasmus. I had to look that up. But it's a severe undernourishment. So I'm not sure how a doctor's wife dies from undernourishment. Yeah. So anyways, he decided to get a fresh start, and his children were living with their grandparents, so the wife that passed away's parents. And he moved to Rough and Ready, Nevada City, California, and he'd learned the printer's trade before he was a doctor in Ohio. So he went west and got a job with the firm that published the Nevada City Journal. And he worked also as a correspondent for the Mining and Scientific Press, Pacific Rural Press. So doing a lot of journalistic stuff. He even had in his print shop another senator that later became well known. He was governor of California and senator in the Congress of the United States, and later minister to Germany. But what this guy is most famous for, his name was Aaron Sargent. He's the first one. He introduced the 19th Amendment, which was the 29 words that gave women the right to vote. It only took 40 years to pass, but he wrote it. He proposed it first, and then they just kept voting on it. But like most people, he had his good and his bad, because he was also a big supporter of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I didn't really understand because he was sort of known as the senator for the Southern Pacific. So you'd think railroads would want the Chinese workers. But that was back in 1850. So he then ended up going back into medicine and was there for the big silver boom in Comstock. And he was actually friends with and the personal physician of somebody you probably heard of. That's Mark Twain. So it's sort of cool to have an ancestor that hung out with Mark Twain. And so he, joined the rush for gold in California as this was all sort of developing. And one of the guys that he had met back there and sort of buddies with was a guy named Leland Stanford, and Stanford University is who he's named for, and he was one of the big railroad men back then, and he was such a big, tall guy that oftentimes he would intimidate the big, strong, tough railroad workers. So he had a lot of interesting people that he lived around and with him. Later he moved up into Santa Rosa where he owned a hotel, and then moved up to Washington State, and he was the city health officer in Walla Walla. But that's sort of the story here about Dr. Alban. The other little interesting tidbit is when his granddaughter married, she married this Thomas Cunningham, and he was killed in a gunfight on the courthouse steps in San Francisco. So San Francisco's become a little more citified since then. 6 months before the famous OK Corral gunfight, just to give you a perspective of the times. And it was between him and his brother-in-law because he felt that his brother-in-law was mistreating his sister-in-law. So that was enough, to cause them to get in this big gunfight there. And he actually had a son who later divorced and then shot and killed his ex-wife, and this was in 1920. And what's interesting about the timing in this story is he fled to Canada, and that was just weeks after Bobby Stagg had been kidnapped, and his father had taken him to Canada. So apparently that was the place to go if you were going to commit a crime, was you split to Canada, and maybe you could hide out there and get away with it. So those are my stories for today.
Those are awesome. It's interesting. It's like, yeah, you're right about the Canadian thing, too. Everybody's trying to race to Canada if somebody doesn't get elected on this election.
Yeah, I was thinking of that as I said that. I was saying to you that I thought about looking up old stories on elections and sharing one of those. There's a lot of old stories on elections, a lot of things. We think this is crazy and, first time ever, and it's never been like this, and everybody knew right away the day after the election, and none of that. I mean, it's been crazy before. Lots of cigar smoke-filled rooms where trades are made and decisions, and on how it ended up, and just everything that's happening now. The only thing that's different is it gets reported so much quicker because, of course, you have instantaneous ability to, through electronics, television broadcasting, radio broadcasting, to be able to share information, but all the goods and bads of both sides and things that happen in elections have all happened before.
So true. So true. It's happened before, and it'll probably happen again, and we're looking at it here in real time as well. But, Dan, I can't wait to see you next week here on the show, and these stories are so valuable because it just kind of – we were able to peek into history, stuff that we don't – we can't look up on Google, be able to peek into history and really kind of understand stuff and how it was going back then.
Yep, and the world will keep turning despite our best efforts to call it to a halt at times.
So true. Well, have a good one, and I'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. Look forward to it.
That was a great story by Dan. I love his adventures, always something interesting. And these historical, interesting things that happen are so fun and exciting. And it just goes to show you that, this stuff isn't that new. We've been doing this stuff for a long time. And there is a bunch of election stuff that we could have talked about today, but I decided to keep that out of this show today because we've talked about it in the past, and we'll definitely be talking about it here in the next few weeks, but we don't need to do it today. When we return, Diane Scabilloni is going to be offering her golden nuggets of wisdom so that we can understand, how to really kind of put doubt in its place and how to deal with that.
A professional who does more than
And we'll be back here in just a few minutes to discuss that. And so stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Diane Scabilloni is here with me, and she's the writer of both My Friendship with Doubt and Rulers Don't Measure, inspirational author of children's books. Diane, I love what you were saying, and I think that there's some real inherent value, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult, and coming from the background that you've had that I think might connect with a lot of our viewers, a lot of our listeners. What are some things that our listeners can do to inspire themselves or even inspire their children to kind of, take over and become more powerful?
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing is to just know, to believe and know that you have special gifts and talents. Every one of us was created with a purpose. And anything that comes in against that is really not truth. You are loved and you have gifts, and that we have these programs that are going through our brains, and we just need to say no to them and to not believe them and to choose a different thought. To, especially during these times, we just really need to be gentle with ourselves and quiet with ourselves and, just connect to our greater inner self. I found that if I sit in quiet, I hear it, you feel it, you start to feel that peace coming over. It's kind of like the crazy negative thoughts are like little puppy dogs, and they're in a little box and they come out of the box. You just got to take those thoughts, put them back in the box. Like, okay, no, we're not going to think about that now. We're going to, focus on the positive. We're going to look at the beauty that we have in life. We're going to empower ourselves with our thoughts and surround ourselves with powerful, empowering people. We're just going to make good choices.
And, another thing, too, I like what you're saying there. And I think sometimes when we're making these changes in our life, these significant changes, it can be overwhelming. We can be scared because it might be different from what we're accustomed to. But a lot of times, it's not about faking it till you make it. It's about just doing it and accepting the fact that it might feel uncomfortable. I mean, how do you feel about that, Diane? Like sometimes you got to put yourself out there and, respect yourself. It might not feel comfortable in the very beginning, but, repetition helps, and then surrounding yourself by other people who want to see you do well as well, and vice versa, is a very important aspect of it.
Exactly. And I feel like the inner calling, like I was saying at the beginning of, there was this inner sassy pants that wanted to be seen and heard and feel empowered. I keep coming back to that part. Like whatever I'm feeling, like this little ping or this little fire ember that I want to do or challenge myself, it's like I go to that and focus on that ember and then say, okay, if I don't try this, if I don't do this, how am I going to feel later? We only have so much time in our lives. It's like we're creating every day who we are going to become. And I'm choosing to stay on the love side instead of on the fear side.
That's powerful. Where can we find more information for our listeners to find your books and to connect with you in your word and your voice?
Yeah, I have a website. It's DianeScabilloni.com, and a Facebook page, Diane Scabilloni author, and you can reach me at those locations. My books are available on Amazon.
That's awesome. Diane, thank you so much for being on the show. I'll definitely want to have you come back on. I know that you have more books in the making, I'm sure.
Yep, I do. Thank you. I would love to. This has been great.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Diane. You're amazing. And for everybody that's listening out there, it's okay to have doubt. It's okay to have fear. It's okay to feel this way. but it's about what do we do every day incrementally? What are the small things that we do? And I know, Diane, you would agree with me. It's like taking small actions, positive actions to reinforce who we are. And I feel that, now more than ever, we've got to push some of the noise out. We've got to focus on what we can try to work on or what we have the ability to change. And I think that when we get overwhelmed with the things that we can't change, we get overwhelmed in the things that we can change and we put it on the back burner. And Diane, thank you so much for your amazing books and for putting this out here for the public and for everybody to read. Thank you. And for everybody out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in today to Live Your True Life Perspectives. We'll be back next week as always. And just remember, it's about you. Focus. Be your best friend. Cherish yourself and respect yourself, okay? Because that's all we have. And if we do it, other people will do it too. Stay tuned for next week and Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess. And I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.